Hi everybody, welcome to week 6. This week we're talking about lesson planning in preparation to complete your 7-minute lessons. Super exciting stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I want to start off by talking about the importance of lesson planning. So lesson plans are the game plan of your classroom. Good lesson planning can make or break you. It helps with classroom management because a well-designed lesson reduces boredom and keeps students engaged, which we know we've talked about a lot. It also sends a message to your students that you are professional and that you have your act together. It's an integral part of teaching because not only does it help you with time management and the progression of the lesson, but it also helps you map out how you want your instruction to align with your learning objectives, and we'll talk about that. Even if you're not going into teaching though, lesson planning can help you because it helps you come up with a cohesive presentation that can help you with public speaking and academic assignments. So it helps you kind of organize your thoughts. In order to properly assess learning, which is the goal of education, right, is you must accomplish the following. Your standards or your learning objectives, your instruction, and your assessment should all align with each other. So that means that, for example, we're going to take a look at an example of a New York State standard. If the standard says that students should write a narrative, but my instruction focuses on just writing in general, and then my assessment does not have students write a narrative, then we know that those three things do not align. So let's take a look at something called backwards design. So we in education talk about backwards design a lot about when we're talking about designing like a whole course. So we think about what are the objectives we have for our students. What do we want students to take away from the course? For your sake, you want to think about what are the standards that you have to fit into your instruction, and what are the objectives. You're still thinking about what do you want students to learn. Then we design assessments around these objectives. So how will assessments demonstrate mastery of the objective? And then we design activities and lessons that align with these assessments. So how will this lesson or activity enable students to complete the assessment? And then we go back and we determine, did this lesson or activity align with the particular standard? Are we addressing all aspects of the standard? So we're working backwards. A lot of times new teachers think about designing like this amazing, engaging lesson, but we don't really think about the big picture of how everything aligns together. Okay, so in order to do lesson planning, we're going to kind of work it out together. I looked at one of New York State's, they're called Next Generation Standards for Literacy, and writing was the one that I chose. I've linked it into the Google Slides for you, and you can take a look at this on Schoology. I'll post it on Schoology, so you can take a look at all of these standards. I'm not super familiar with these, I have to be honest with you. I'm not located out of New York, but I chose something that maybe you might see in the future in your education studies. So the standard that I chose is Literacy 6 through 12 Anchor Standards for Writing, and the substandards talks about text types and purposes, and standard number 3, so to write narratives to understand an event or topic using effective techniques, well-chosen details, and well-structured sequences. So step 1 in lesson planning is we want to think about what does the standard attempt to accomplish. So if we just look at this standard off the bat, it's very vague. We know that we want students to write narratives to understand an event or topic, but what are effective techniques? What are well-chosen details? What are well-structured sequences? Those can be kind of iffy, like we're not really sure what the definition of that would be. So you first want to interpret the standard. What is it saying? What do you need to accomplish? What will the final result look like after meeting the standard? What do you think the assessment might look like? And something else you want to consider, what are the skills necessary for the student to understand and master in order to meet the standard? So how can they write a narrative using effective techniques, well-chosen details, and well-structured sequences? All right, so step 2 would be to develop learning objectives. So we have our standard, which is kind of like the baseline. That's the outcome or the goal. of the learning. And then your learning objectives are how we're going to get there. So they're the actions that we need to take in order to meet that standard. So we're going to break this standard down into tangible learning objectives. Like I mentioned before, these are typically written with action words to demonstrate what students will do to meet the standard. What are the actions they need to take? So I've written these out. You might choose something else to accomplish this, but this is what I might do. Students will gain an understanding of events and topics. So we kind of need to explain what an event and topic is, right? Students will practice effective narrative writing techniques. So one of my learning objectives is for them to write a narrative. Students will be able to point out what are well-chosen details in a narrative and should be able to demonstrate this in their writing. So I want them to pinpoint what these ideas are. And students will be able to point out what are well-structured sequences in a narrative and be able to demonstrate this in their writing. So I've taken the standard and I've broken it down into tangible learning objectives that I know students can achieve in order to meet this standard based on my instruction. So step 3 is to meet the learning objectives through instruction. So here we have the standard again. I know that my assessment in some way to meet the standard will have students write their own narratives and present them, let's say, in any medium of their choice to the class. So that would be my assessment. Did they write a narrative demonstrating these techniques? And they could use any medium of choice. So what are the kinds of activities that I could involve my students in order to build up to achieving a narrative so they can be assessed on their learning and I can see, okay, they've met standard 3. So number 1, students will gain an understanding of events and topics. So things that I can do, instructional techniques. I can I can teach them a mini lesson about what are appropriate narrative topics. And then students can create a list of their own to choose from. So here we talk about events and topics and how we can understand how these are tied into narrative. Students will practice effective narrative writing techniques. So in the classroom, I would probably give them a choice of examples of different types of narratives, so maybe videos, written narratives, maybe even visual narratives, and have them choose one of these types and then practice it. So this example will work as an expert example, so they have something to fall back on. We're putting learning into context, which I'll talk about in a minute. Students will then be able to point out what are well-chosen details in a narrative and should be able to demonstrate this in their writing. So that's a really vague concept. So I would probably want to teach them a mini lesson about details in narrative, provide them lots and lots of examples, and then they can workshop around this idea of well-chosen details in their own writing and compare that to the expert example that they already chose. And then the similar to work around what are well-structured sequences in a narrative, I would probably do something similar. Have them learn about well-structured sequences in narratives, provide them examples, talk about it, and then workshop around their expert examples with their own writing so they can compare and contrast what those examples look like. So the concept is not so vague for them. All right, so step 4, which really ties into step 3, it could be the same step if you want, determining the context for learning. Students need to have a context. They should have lots of examples, especially when you're dealing with vague standards, to help them put into context, for example, what a narrative looks like. So what are the tools that you would need to provide students with in order to put learning into context? So you're going to need examples. So are you going to need to look up videos? Are you going to need to find books that they can read or other examples? Where would you get these examples from? So those are the tools that you're going to need in order to conduct these lessons. So step 5 would be, now that you've determined your standards, your learning objectives, and your tools, then you can begin to write a lesson plan. So there's many different templates for lesson planning. I'll show you an example of one that I've written in the past, just really briefly, and you can take a look at it more on your own. But this is for a first-year seminar class. This is the first week of class during the fall semester. I have my learning objective 1, which is to evaluate the core components of academic and social belonging at Kansas State University. So I've written down, we have some enduring questions, and then I've written down the enumerated lesson plan. So step 1, for 2 minutes, I'm going to introduce myself. Step 2, I'm going to talk about the syllabus for about 30 minutes. So you can see I've broken the lesson down into minute-by-minute intervals. And so let's take a look at the lesson planning. So you can find a lot of planning templates on Word or on the internet, but the main components that you should have for your lesson plan are your name, the date, the course number or class, like you can see listed on mine, the time frame for the lesson, so from what time to what time, your learning objectives, an enumerated plan for the lesson progression. So as you can see, I showed you exactly what I would be doing minute by minute or by time intervals. And then any assessments that might align with the learning objectives. So if you scroll down, you can see I have a formative assessment that my students would do on the second day. Okay. If you want to include any assessments on your lesson plan, you're welcome to do that. You can think about using Socrative like I do, or Quizlet, or anything like that in order to bolster student participation. So now, before you start your 7-minute lesson assignment, what I'd like you to do is just practice writing out a lesson plan. So take one of the activities I outlined in step 3. So let's say maybe you want to create a mini lesson about details in narrative. So what you're going to do is pause the video and create a rudimentary lesson plan by going step by step through the process to create your own lesson. So you can maybe make it like a brief 30-minute lesson, break it down like I did. How would you teach this lesson? What are the tools that you would need? So make sure that you practice that before you get into your 7-minute lesson. All right. The next step would be for you to apply everything that you've learned into the 7-minute lesson planning part 1. For part 1 of the assignment, you should create your own 7-minute lesson. To do so, you should repeat the process that I showed you to create your own lesson. So think about something that you would like to teach the class. That would be your learning objective. So it can be anything that interests you. Think about what types of assessments too that you can include, if any, and what tools you'll need to reach this learning objective. So how would you make all of those align if you include any of them? So you should be demonstrating active teaching for this assignment. So either a video or a narrated slide or something along those lines will be appropriate. A file will not be appropriate unless you just want to add it as a supplementary file. You won't receive credit for the assignment if you just submit a file, because we need to actually observe you teaching. So I have an example of this really rudimentary video that I created about how to make your homemade French fries. I posted it on the syllabus, so excuse me, you could take a look at that. I created that for a doctoral class. That could be something you could focus on, any topic that you want. Just think about what your learning objectives are and design out your plan. So again, you can use any template that you want, but you should upload your lesson plan with your 7-minute video to Schoology. If you need a refresher about the assignment, please refer back to the syllabus. And if you have any questions along the way, if you want me to take a quick look at your lesson plan, then that's totally fine. I don't mind doing that at all. So you can bounce off some ideas off of me. So for part 2, this is a 2-part assignment. So part 1 is to submit the assignment next week, next Sunday. And then your discussion post for that week will be to comment on 2 of your classmates' posts. So these comments will be due on Tuesday after the assignment is due. So don't worry about trying to accomplish this on Sunday. So you should choose 2 classmates to observe closely, take notes, and offer feedback to them. So make sure it's positive and constructive feedback. Think about what we've learned about lesson planning and what we've learned about education. Your feedback should be approximately 2 paragraphs per person that you observe. And it's important for you to base your feedback on observable action. So what did you see? What worked? What didn't? Simply stating that you enjoyed the lesson is not enough. And I also want you to take a look at their lesson plan and see what it looks like. Is there any feedback that you can offer to your fellow course mates on their lesson plan? So I hope that helps you get started with your assignment. Again, if you want to ask me any questions about topics or how to get started on lesson planning, feel free to email me. And I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with next week. Take care, everybody.